All right. Good evening, everyone. Thank you to the Forest Stewardship Education Program special session tonight on bears in the woods. We have 3 guest speakers tonight. We're going to be talking a little bit about bears and the post-fire environment, bears and what they can kind of at least to me, it was unexpected damage that they can do to some of your trees early on in the spring. And then I'll wrap up with a speaker who's going to talk to us about some non-lethal tools that landowners can use to protect livestock and other resources from bears and other predators. So I would like, though, first the 3 guest speakers to introduce themselves. And I'm going to go ahead and start with Dan.
Yeah, my name is Dan Ruka, and I'm a grad student at UC Davis studying the effects of wildfire on black bears. And yeah, that's basically a little bit about me.
Great, thanks, Dan. Mike?
Yeah, good evening. My name is Michael Jones. I'm the UC Extension Forester for Mendocino Lake and Sonoma County. And yeah, I'll be talking about bears in the forest.
Thanks, Mike. And Dan Macon.
Well, good evening, everybody. I'm Dan Macon. I'm a Livestock and Natural Resources Advisor in the Northern Foothills and Sierra region, and I'll be talking about non-lethal predator protection tools.
Great. Thanks, everyone. And as a reminder, please put your questions in the chat box. So Dan, we'll turn it over to you.
Alrighty then. Let's see, share my screen here. One moment. Okay. Alrighty. Like I said before, my name is Dan Ruka, and I'm a master's student at the University of California, Davis. I'm in the graduate group in ecology there in the Department of Wildlife, Fish, and Conservation Biology. My advisor is Roger Baldwin, and he's the professor of cooperative extension at the Department of Wildlife, Fish, and Conservation Biology and at UC Davis as well. And my research and what I will be talking about is the effects of wildfire on the Lassen Volcanic National Park black bear population. Oops. Yeah. So some of my personal background, I actually graduated from the University of Wisconsin, Stevens Point in 2020. And here is where I was introduced to bear research. I was part of the Wisconsin Black Bear Project there, volunteered on it. And this included, basically we would track down bears that were in their dens that have GPS collars. And once we found their den, the biologists then had to sneak into the den to sedate the bear. And we then removed the bear from the den. Once the bear is out of the den, we took measurements and we checked the overall health of the bear. And if the collar was very tattered, then we would also refit it for a new GPS collar. After that, I moved on to Lassen Volcanic National Park, and there I was a part of the bear management team and a backcountry ranger. This included making sure backcountry campers were storing food properly in black bear country with bear canisters. I also hazed habituated bears there from human use areas. And this is also when I came up with the idea for this research project with the park wildlife biologist there, Mike Magnuson. And then in the summer of 2022, I worked at Sequoia and Kings Canyon National Parks. There I was also part of the bear management team, and I had more hands-on experience with bears. We would haze and capture habituated bears as well, and then also attach GPS collars to them to try to track them as well. But some basic black bear ecology. So obviously not all black bears are black, especially in California. They can be different colors such as brown, cinnamon, blonde, and black even. Their diet includes roots, berries, meat, insects, grass, forbs. And this versatile diet allows them to use a variety of different habitats which include coniferous and deciduous forests, and even open alpines. Basically anywhere they can find food, but mostly where there are trees, so if they feel danger, they can escape. Females, also known as sows, give birth to cubs every other year, and this is only if food sources are sufficient. They need to be able to have enough fat reserves when they go into their den to be able to rear the next generation. And black bears are also easily attracted to human-associated foods, and this leads to habituation, which habituation just means black bears become very comfortable around humans, and this also can lead to food conditioning as well. And once they're habituated, it also can be a lot harder to scare them away from human use areas. Well, what are some of the effects that wildfire can have on black bears? So there can be disadvantages, but there's also advantages too that wildfire can have to black bears. Some advantages are that wildfires can stimulate new growth of vegetation, and this provides fresh forage for black bears. And this can include an abundance of berries, nuts, and other foods that black bears consume. There's also more downed logs, which will typically have insects and grubs that bears like to eat. Fire also creates a mosaic of different habitat types, offering a range of environments for bears to explore and utilize. And there's obviously disadvantages too for wildfire for black bears. Intense wildfires can destroy large areas of habitat, and this can reduce available shelter and denning sites for black bears. Bears may be forced to also leave their territories due to wildfires, leading to conflicts with humans as they search for new habitat and food sources. This can lead to habituation and food conditioning, as I mentioned before. And also in extreme cases, wildfires can lead to direct mortality of black bears through burns or smoke inhalation. A little bit of history about the Dixie Fire. This is the fire that impacted Lassen. It began in July 14th, 2021. It began in Northern California and eventually became one of the state's largest wildfires. The fire then spread toward Lassen and then posed a significant threat to the park's ecosystems. The rapid spread of the fire led to extensive destruction of vegetation in and around the park. This includes ancient forests, meadows, and volcanic landscapes within the park that were damaged by the advancing flames. Also, a long-standing fire lookout tower also burnt down in the blaze, along with other buildings as well. Park officials continue to assess the extent of the damage, and they have begun implementing recovery measures to restore affected ecosystems. And in their assessment, they estimated about 70% of the park was burnt down in 2021 by the Dixie Fire. As you can see, pretty extent damage there as you see the burnt area compared to the green area in that photo. But my research is directly looking at how the Dixie Fire impacted the black bear populations of Lassen. So one of my goals was, how does wildfire affect the habitat use of black bears? Do they avoid burnt areas? Do they still travel through these areas? Do they still use these areas? And another goal of my research is a black bear population estimate post-wildfire. How, you might ask? So we have a unique opportunity in Lassen Volcanic National Park. They did a study back in 2017, 2018, where they were trying to identify mesocarnivore populations. And mesocarnivores are things as Pacific marten that you see in the top right photo there, or a Sierra Nevada red fox in the bottom right photo. Basically, predators are not as large as mountain lions or black bears or wolves. In this study, they used remote cameras and hair snares to gather the population information. Obviously, black bears are attracted to many things. They have a very strong sense of smell, so black bears also visited this site, and they got enough hair from the black bears to make an estimate of the black bear population before the Dixie Fire. And with this camera data, we can also be used to assess occupancy and habitat use, and that's done with a statistical model known as an occupancy model, which can give us a better idea about their habitat use. So as you can see here, I'm holding some hair snares with some black bear hair on it, and we use this to analyze the hair and based on their DNA. And with this hair, we can identify the number of different individuals, and also the sex of the individuals with the hair. With this, we'll be using a mark recapture model, which is another statistical model, to come up with a population estimate. And the original samples were taken to UC Davis back in 2017, 2018, and that's also where I will be analyzing these hair samples as well. So my study design, so we have 5 hair snares at each site. They're attached to the tree, and at each site, there's also 2 cameras pointed at the tree. We have one that's straight on and another one from a lower side angle. These 2 different views kind of give us different ways to identify different individuals of black bears. We also need to be able to obviously attract the bears to come to the site to actually get the hair on the hair snares. So that's done with a metal bait box that's actually very secure and the bears can't get into it. And we put sardines into the bait box. We also put a scent lure under the tree as well that can help them. It's very strong smelling and it brings in the bears as well. So there's 33 total sites and I've done 16 so far this past summer, and I got 17 to go this coming summer. And so far I've collected 26 hair samples and I've had 76 bear detections on cameras across 12 sites. This obviously can be the same bear for different detections. It's just a different amount of times I've actually seen a bear on camera. I'm also collecting scat samples as well. I've collected 52 scat samples so far, and the point of collecting the scat samples is to better analyze their diet, see if they get into any anthropogenic foods or just how they're using their habitat. So this is a map from 2017, 2018 of all the bear detections that the previous study I mentioned had in the park. The yellow stars are every detection that they've made, and the red dots are where they did not detect any bears. As you can see, they are basically found throughout the whole park, as it's pretty clear with their very versatile diet needs and can adapt to many sorts of habitats as well. But this past summer, this is what I've detected so far. This is the 2023 bear detections. So this is overlaid with the Dixie fire that went through in 2021. The red is obviously high severity, and then the green goes down to like the low severity of the fire. The yellow stars are where, like I mentioned before, where I detected black bears this past summer, and the blue dots are where I did not detect any. The red dots are still the sites I need to get to yet, and as you can see in the southeast corner, they got hit pretty hard by the Dixie fire with a high severity there, and I'm really curious to see how the bears are still utilizing the area, or if they still are. But what's next? So this coming summer, I have more field work to do. I need to finish the study, put the rest of the sites up, and continue collecting hair. We also hope to run some lab samples, like I mentioned, the DNA hair analysis for population estimate. And then we also hope to do a stable isotope analysis for hair samples. This includes basically looking, instead of just a scat would tell you about what their last meal what they ate, but a stable isotope hair analysis can tell you basically the life of that hair, what kind of diet that black bear had. So like I mentioned before, some of the things we hope to find, how and if the Alaskan black bear population has changed post Dixie fire, and then also how the habitat is used by black bears post wildfire. This also has management implications as well. Alaskan Park staff will have great information on how to manage the local bear population, and the California Department of Fish and Wildlife will also be informed of the results to better strategize their future black bear studies. This research also has broad scale implications as to potential negative and positive short-term effects fire has on black bears with their population and habitat use. This could be also used to inform how black bears are managed throughout the Western United States. We hope to do some public engagement this summer as well. We hope to work with the Lassen Field Station and then Lassen leadership to help build formal learning programs and opportunities, such as programs at the Volcano Adventure Camp with K through 12 youth. With these programs, they can learn about black bears, learn how we are studying bears, and this is also very important to entice students to enter the ecological sciences. And they can also learn how wildfire can affect wildlife, the positives and negatives, like I mentioned before with black bears. We also hope to have some programs at the visitor center as well. This includes presentations like this, or possibly even a poster display that could be up all summer in the visitor center, or maybe even some workshops too that can kind of like guides youth how to do this black bear research. But with that, thank you for listening to my talk, and myself or my advisor can answer any questions that you may have.
Thanks, Dan. We'll give folks just a moment or two to see if there are any questions that they'd like to put in the chat box.
Okay.
I did have a question for you, Dan, and
Yeah.
this is one of my areas of passion. So, how long would it typically take? I've read some of the other studies for these areas be repopulated after heavy fire and burned areas be repopulated by bears.
How long does it take for it to be repopulated? It's hard to say for sure. I was definitely getting bear detections in the burnt areas. It's whether or not they stay in those areas is another question. I think they probably will still be utilizing them to get berries and other foraging things, but hard to say how long it will take. I mean, they need to have proper shelter and things like that in these areas. It might take a while for them to actually stay permanently in those areas.
And also, by the way, wonderful presentation as well. Have you seen an increase post-fire for human-wildlife conflict?
Have not in the park.
Okay, great.
They actually, I don't think as many people are backpacking in those burnt areas now. So I think it possibly has decreased. I don't know for sure. But this past summer, there really was not many human wildlife conflicts when I worked there.
So Dan, there's a question. What is the typical range for black bears?
Like the home range?
Like their home range, yes.
Yeah, so females actually have a smaller range than the males. The males have a larger range because they're obviously mating with many females, but they can be from like 10 to 20 square kilometers or even like less than that. It's very variable. The females, especially with cubs, will have smaller ranges as the cubs obviously can't go as far as when the female would not have cubs. So yeah, it varies, and the males can be almost twice as large, their home range.
And then another question is what was the average population size of the black bears in Lassen before the fire?
Yeah, so we got 54 different individuals but that's not with a estimation model, so it could be upwards 60 to 70 roughly the population. But that's, yeah, we had 54 different hair samples, but it could be more than that. Definitely probably was.
And how do you
Also, how do you locate? Go ahead. Yeah.
How do you locate their dens?
So not doing it in Lassen, but when I was in Wisconsin on that black bear project, they had GPS collars on them, so we trapped them previously, and then we would basically, with those GPS collars, find their location, and that's how we would know where their den was.
Do they tend to stick to their same home range areas, or do they migrate?
I guess if they don't have resources in a certain area, they can definitely move out of that area. That's kind of one of the things I'm trying to figure out with this study, is see if they're still using the same area or not. But, and obviously the new cubs will have to like go find different areas as well, because they don't typically use the same area as their mother would. Females will sometimes overlap the same like home range as their mothers, but males will typically go out and explore much more.
As your research, how do you anticipate it being utilized by park management and bear management in the future?
Yeah, so like at the park scale, like with this information, they could obviously like mostly it would be like to give information to the public and so they know like how the population is being affected. And if it does become a problem like human wildlife conflicts, then that kind of information can be used as well. But if there's not as many bears, obviously, then it won't be as much of an issue.
Any other questions for Dan? All right, well, he's with us the whole time. So if you think of something, please feel free to put it in the chat. Thank you, Dan.
Yeah, thank you.
Here's one that did come in. Do
Okay.
bears have predators?
Oh, yeah, they definitely can have predators, but mostly I would say when they're younger, other bears can definitely predate on them, mountain lions, wolves. But once they're full grown, not many predators for them at all.
All right, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
All right, so next up tonight is Mike.
All right. Let me get. All right. Well, good evening. Thank you for having me. I'm not a wildlife biologist. I'm an entomologist, so I'm way out on my element, but I'm going to try to talk about bears like they're insects, I guess. I don't know. My predecessor was a wildlife biologist, so a lot of my thoughts are based on his research and a lot of the work he did in the 90s and early 2000s on this topic. This is going to be the most unfulfilling talk of the night because the takeaway is that bears like to eat redwood. It's happening more frequently. Its distribution is getting larger, and we don't know why, and we don't know how to manage for it. So there's your takeaway. I'm done. No, but so it's an interesting challenge, right? We kind of have some silvicultural and management prescriptions for other types of pests, but for bears, we haven't really figured it out yet. And there's lots of reasons why, and we'll talk about those. So it's about forest health and bears. And this is specifically kind of my area, which is Mendocino, so that's where I'm going to be talking about most of my observations. But there is some history in literature of kind of a forestry community kind of trying to understand this behavior for quite a while now. So, from the literature and from the foresters and from, people who've lived in these places for a long time, bears have been a pretty important disturbance in the Pacific Northwest and the northern part of the Redwood Range, so Del Norte area and Southern Oregon for a very long time. And the literature goes back to, the early 1900s, 1950 in particular. There's really a strong kind of representation of foresters and researchers and wildlife biologists trying to understand this bear dynamic because it was pretty common and it was kind of picking up an activity in those areas. Pretty significant economic pest too when you're managing for timber. In more recent years, we've seen this kind of behavior spreading, and so now we're seeing it move south out of the Pacific Northwest, out of the Northern Range redwoods, and into kind of the more central range. So we're now detecting in the last decade or so bear damage down to like the Fort Bragg, so central Mendocino coast, and a lot of that has happened fairly rapidly, I guess, and kind of bears moving around time scale. But it's a pretty significant problem that a lot of landowners are facing huge challenges with, and we just don't really have answers at this point and really understand the behavior and why it's occurring in the first place. But it is getting more prevalent and becoming more of a challenge when you're managing for timber. We see most of the damage occurring in the spring. bears are waking up or coming out of their torpor or becoming more active, this is a very readily available source of food at that time of the year. Maybe we can speculate later, but maybe with other issues of food resources, this is something that they've learned has been easily attainable when the trees are really starting to become active at the same time and are really vigorous and have very sugar-rich sap that is easy to access. So maybe it's because this is a food source at a time when there isn't many other types of food. It's common on roads and edges, so kind of like transitions, any place where there's lots of light that gets into the stand, where the trees can grow more vigorously, or because wildlife like humans are lazy and they like to use roads for navigation and finding food, it occurs kind of in these places where we would walk because the bears are walking in the same places. So we see it on road edges and in low density stands where they can more easily get to the trees and get around the trees and feed. So for example, in this particular photo, you see there's a lot of issues going on in this stand. This is Grandfir that's not doing too well, but these are redwood. If you see this one's fading out, this one's fading out, the one in the background is fading out. All these have bear damage that's pretty significant, and it's right on the edge of a meadow that the landowner is kind of trying to re-establish trees in, and he's lost a lot of those trees because the bears have decided that that's a snap. So edges, open stands, fast growing trees, lots of light, so they respond well. The trees respond well. It means there's more sugar, more food. And in contrast to other pests, that I'll show a picture of real quick, and thinking about managing the health of redwoods, bears preferentially feed at the base of the tree, and that feeding in one sitting, in one feeding event, or maybe multiple feeding events over a couple of days, will rapidly girdle that main stem, which means go all the way around the circumference, and they'll consume that cambium, that tissue completely, and it rapidly leads to mortality of those trees. So this is a pretty significant, right? One bear can do a lot of damage in a short amount of time. So this is a pretty, on the time scale of trying to figure out management strategies, pretty rapid disturbance events that they're hard to keep on top of. Then this is contrast to other pests that we think about. In particular, if we're talking about other animals, the rodents. So in my area, tree squirrels, can girdle the tops of redwoods and kill the tops. And redwoods are really good resprouters, and they're kind of weeds that are hard to kill, but they'll resprout multiple tops, or they'll kind of grow out of this, or maybe redwood canker with redwood bark beetle, but they can still kind of persist through some of this top damage. The trees can grow around it or grow out of it. But when the feeding or the girdling occurs at the base, that's a pretty significant source of damage. So it's much more, this is very noticeable, the tops redwoods that we see. It's like, I get a lot of calls about that. We get a lot of interest, but it's not, to me, it's not as significant of a problem as bears that are able to rapidly kill whole trees. So why is this happening? And I kind of went into this a little bit. Shrug, we don't know. Nobody really knows because we're not studying it. Dan, time to come to the redwoods. We need research. Nobody's, there's lots of speculation that we can have a nice conversation about. But at the end of the day, nobody's really monitoring or trying to study the bear populations to understand why these new behaviors are appearing and what might be driving those changes. Part of it is because this cambium, the sugars and the kind of ease of access is very addicting. You hear from wildlife biologists that have kind of been in the area, hunters and depredation kind of managers. They talk about bears that get addicted to the cambium their teeth are loaded with cavities, right? So there's a very clear evidence in bear kills and in carcasses. They can look at their teeth and see that, yeah, they've been consuming a lot of sugar from the cambium, and it's in their feces. You can see the wood fibers too. So part of it's that they get addicted to the sugars, I think. And, I don't know, I've licked redwood. It tastes pretty good. So easy access to calories, again, at a time of year when maybe there aren't a lot of other calories available. And we could probably have a really interesting conversation about that, because historically, presumably there was lots of food available when the bears were waking up. And maybe we've kind of changed things like salmon and the types of berries and the foods that are available. Maybe those aren't as abundant as it used to be in these areas, and maybe there's other things like land use changes, so their migratory paths or their routes to get food, or you know, maybe they're learning this behavior because they do like the sugar, so there is evidence that they're passing this behavior on from either the cub, and then also it's easy to get to, so maybe they're just, you know, it's an easy source of food that they can quickly get access to because the trees don't fight back, right? And why are we seeing these increases in damage? So it's not just that it's spreading, but in the areas with where we're seeing damage, and particularly like Humboldt del Norte, where this has been for a long time, we're seeing significant increases in the amount of damage, so much so that it's decimating a lot of timber operations in some areas, concentrated areas, because of the amount of trees that are killing every year. And why is that? We don't know. We're not really studying the bear populations. Are there more bears? Are they just more concentrated because of the land use changes or the way we've densified that wildland-urban interface? Is there not enough food? Are there other disturbances driving them to move and feed on trees or into these areas on the coast? A lot of landowners like to speculate that it was the rule change in hunting, that making dog use for bear hunting illegal changed the amount of bear take that occurred during hunting season, and so that's where we're seeing more bears, I suppose. And usually it's like a little bit of everything, right? So, you know, we need to really kind of start to really look at these questions to understand why we're seeing these effects. It's hard to take good pictures of bear damage on trees, and I don't wait. Every bear encounter I've had has been kind of one of surprise, and both of us going, oh shit, and then running away from each other. So I'm not sitting in the woods like trying to wait for a bear to start feeding on the tree. So it's hard to get a picture of this, but this is pretty typical. You just kind of come into a tree, it's stripped, and you see the incisor kind of stripping. I have another photo that on the bark, and that's, you know, a good sign that is definitely bear damage. So management, yeah, this is another big question. The research that does exist shows that silvicultural practices that we use in the redwood forest can certainly be a factor in perhaps attracting behavior, or that behavior, or maybe creating capacity for more of it to occur because of the fact that we're creating these really fast-growing, vigorous, healthy trees that have lots of sugar. But we really need to know what mechanism is driving this behavior before we can figure out how to address it. But there certainly seems to be some evidence that maybe we have to think differently about how we manage these forests where there's lots of bear activity. So pre-commercial thinning, PCTs, which is a way of thinning the stand to help target growth onto the remaining trees. You know, what we've seen is that when you do that, you increase the growth rate of these trees. They produce tons of sugar. You give them more light, you give them more space. They produce all the sugar, and the bears find them and kill them in the same year you've thinned the stand out. So maybe it means that we have to maintain higher stand density, more multi-age or uneven age management to keep stands more dense, so that it's more challenging for them to navigate. But even when you have dense stands, I've seen fairy rings with tight clusters of trees where they'll just kind of start on the outside, and then they'll kill those trees, and they'll just work their way into the clump and eventually kill the entire clump. And also, I didn't mention this before, but you know, the literature suggests that they typically like to feed around that 12-inch DBH, the diameter breast size class. But now we're seeing bears going after trees that are over 2 foot at DBH, and they'll even climb them now. So typically this feeding occurs in this photo at the base, but now we're seeing bears going 50 feet up a tree. Maybe that's a mom sending her cubs as well, and they're girdling the whole tree all the way to the ground. It's pretty impressive. So as long as the tree can support their weight, they're going up to get that sugar. And an interesting idea is maybe we need road buffers. I don't know if it works. I think a bear is smart enough to just walk through it into the thinned area. But you know, these ideas of managing the stands with heterogeneity to deter the behavior or kind of minimize the amount of damage. Higher stand densities means you are accounting for that potential loss. So maybe you're leaving more trees knowing the bears will kill some of them. Lots of different ways to think about this. But like I said, until we really know what's driving this behavior, it's hard to figure out how to manage for it. And then just to finish on that thought is maybe we need to manage more diversity in these redwood forest stands. So create resources, right? So have more openings in the forest to get more light to the forest floor to trigger berry growth, berry production, and other types of food they might be looking for at this time of year. and creating this heterogeneity habitat so that they're less likely to concentrate into area and maybe spread out and look for resources. And then lastly is it's important to remember that, you know, bears in this context, they are ecosystem engineers, right? They are killing trees that create snags, that create habitat, creates diversity. And so we're you know, the idea here is not to eliminate bear damage. We can't do that anyway with disturbance. It's kind of part of the ecosystem, but how do we manage for it? A couple of last thoughts is my predecessor, Greg, who's a wildlife biologist, was very adamant that culling bear populations was not the solution. It wasn't working in the 90s. It wasn't working in the 2000s. So it's not just a matter about there being too many bears. There's something else driving this behavior. You know, he wanted a multi-pronged approach of a societal assessment, ecological, biological assessment. But culling bears doesn't seem like it's the right solution by itself. And then also a lot of the old timber companies baited bears. Baiting sounds the right term. They provided food, alternative food sources in the spring. So they would put out like maple sugar and other like wood chips saturated in syrups and things like that in areas to draw the bears to those spaces. So they're feeding the bears these artificial diets to get them away from their trees. That seems like a really bad idea and not something that we're probably likely going to, Fish and Wildlife will let us move back towards. I've also had some landowners who've tried that in their own property, in their own time, and it doesn't work because, you know, how much alternative food source do you have to provide a bear to get it to not go after your redwood is an interesting question that I don't think we really know. So what are the trade-offs for that kind of management strategy? Yeah, that's what I got. So I'm sure there's lots of questions. Maybe there's good conversation about I know there's other foresters on here and folks who have other ideas or have seen behavior. We need to figure out how to get Fish and Wildlife to be more interested in this and get them to kind of step up and really start studying the bears so that we can figure out appropriate management strategies to deal with these disturbance agents and to figure out why it's spreading so that we can prepare for it as it continues to move you know, south along the range. So yeah, thanks. And questions? Do we have time? I don't know how we're doing this. Tim, is this a Q&A after or right now?
No, we have a couple of questions right now. Someone said to me that, so we know you mentioned that they start feeding in the spring when the sap is really running and sugar rich and the bears come out and they're hungry. So how long then are we talking that tends to be their preferential snack?
I mean, it's year round, right? You see new bear damage pretty much year round, except for when they're kind of in their torpor. I don't know if they do a true hibernation on the coast. Nothing really does. It's just so warm. But you pretty much, you see a big surge of it in the spring, but then you can find trees getting chewed on pretty much throughout the entire growing season.
Mm-hmm.
And often they'll respond to timber operations, right? So if you do like that pre-commercial thin or something that reduces stand density, gives the trees space to grow, they get more light, that more space, they kick into hyperdrive their sugar production, they take advantage of that, photosynthesize and produce all that photosynthate. And then you can see bears kind of in an area where they're established, you see that activity will respond pretty quickly to that too.
Mm-hmm. And are there some species of trees that they don't like to snack on?
Well, yeah, we're specifically, I guess I should have said that, sorry. They're specifically going after redwood, Doug fir, and further north in the Pacific Northwest, they'll go after grand fir as well. On the hardwoods, they're going probably like the tan oak and the chinkapin, they're going after the fruit, so they're not necessarily stripping the bark. However, I've seen bear damage either whether it's marking or exploratory, you know, foraging on a lot of different tree species. So they're testing, just like we would test any tree for producing syrup. It seems like they're kind of testing the buffet out as well. But it's primarily because of the fact that redwoods and Doug firs are economic drivers in these forests. That's the species that people are most concerned about.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And Mike, is it happening in plantations and more original stands?
Yeah, so I kind of mentioned like multi-age or uneven age management and even age management and plantations, especially after pre-commercial thin and plantation. Yeah, you're looking at pretty significant losses because it's just like a bunch of lollipops perfectly spaced out with nothing in between them. and they're all the same size. And so I could see a bear just sitting in there, you know, for a couple days, just eating trees.
Mhm. Great. Any more questions for Mike or other comments from folks that are online?
Yeah, I'll just quickly chime in here a little bit. Most of the damage, at least that's been reported historically to timber from black bears, is during that period of time where they wake up from hibernation and are waiting for other food resources to show up. It's basically what they consider a negative foraging period, where the bears are actually actively out there feeding and they're still losing weight because the quality of the food resource is so poor that they're not able to start putting on that weight, but it's better than nothing. It's slowing down their weight loss at least. And so that's usually what we observe with the cambium feeding on these kinds of trees. So it's not surprising, certainly, that the majority of the damage is occurring at that time of year. I'm kind of curious as to how much damage is continuing to occur later in the year when other food resources generally become more abundant. But yeah, that's kind of what we'd expect from there. It is surprising that it's extending further south, and I'm kind of curious as to the reasons why for that as well. Certainly, substantially reduced harvest leading to potentially increased bear populations could be one explanation, but that would only be probably part of it, part of the question.
Question for you,
Part of the answer.
Roger.
Sorry.
Has anyone tried any kind of tree guard, or have either one of you heard of anything like that? Kind of like they'd have for a bird feeder, one of our participants was asking. If there's any kind of guard for the tree itself or anything that can be done.
That'd be a whole lot of tree guards. That's one of the potential problems for that. And Mike can probably expand on that too. But I mean, I don't know how you'd begin to put enough guards out there in an entire forest for that to be practical. And not only that, I mean, nothing is tougher and stronger than a bear out there. So the kind of material you would have to make that out of to truly make it bear proof would further add to the cost prohibitive nature of it all. There's been some work that's been done with repellents over the years, but even at that, trying to spray the trunks of all the trees out there, even if we could come up with something that was sufficiently repellent, I think would be cost prohibitive there too.
Yeah, I don't know if anybody successfully repelled bears. There's not much you can wrap a tree with that a bear can either destroy or get around. Repellents wouldn't work because they're just going to flake the bark off and get away from it. And, the only thing that works really when you think about beekeepers in the woods is highly electrified fences. So I guess you could start wrapping redwood stands with electric fences if you wanted to. But again, it's cost prohibitive, and I suppose you could get like guardian dogs for your trees, right? Are they at least like deterred? I don't know. I'm starting to run into bears that don't run away. Like I'm having stare downs with bears now in the woods, and we're like, so how's this going to work out? And we're just kind of staring at each other until somebody decides to move. So I don't think they're really scared about much right now, and it's kind of a little concerning. But yeah.
So maybe for the small private forest landowner, for that legacy tree, that tree that, your kids grew up climbing or whatever, that one or two tree that you really want to protect, maybe a fence around that one would, you could pay for, but not a whole property.
Yeah. And you can't plant your way out of it either, right? I have a landowner who planted, 25,000 redwoods over a couple decades, and he's lost almost 2/3 of them at this point in about a decade. So you can't plant fast enough to kind of compensate for how quickly the bear in these, I think they're hot spots, right? It really seems like it's not distributed evenly across the range. It's really these concentrated areas where the behavior is observable and really intense.
Thanks, Mike and Roger. Any other questions? All right. Well, Mike, you gave a perfect segue into Dan's talk about guard dogs and other methods.
Thank you for the introduction, Mike. That's perfect. Let me see if I can share my screen here. All right, are you all seeing that in presentation mode?
Yes.
Perfect. Well, just a little further introduction. For me, I am a livestock guy, and so much of my talk tonight is going to be focused on protecting livestock from predators. But I think there are some lessons we can take from the things we've learned in livestock production that apply to other types of resources. It's kind of like the Hair Club for Men. I'm also a sheep producer that has had guard dogs for almost 20 years, and so I've seen lots of different ways that they work and a few ways that they don't work, and we'll try to share some of that as well. One of our other colleagues, Carolyn Weitzel, who is a wildlife human interactions advisor, is also with us tonight, and Carolyn's had lots of experience in this as well, and hopefully she'll weigh in where I mess up. So you kind of got to start with a little bit of humor about predators if you're in the sheep business in particular. This is one of my favorite bumper stickers. We deal with predators all the time. Everything except the American consumer likes to eat mutton, I think. So we do deal with this from time to time. But I think it's also important to put it in context, in particular with livestock. With beef cattle, predation is typically a very small proportion of the death losses that we see in the US and in California in particular. But with sheep and also with goats, we do see a bit more predation, particularly with young animals, with lambs and kids. And so it's something that can be very localized and can be very, very significant depending on where you are. One of the other things that I think it's clear, and I hadn't really seen that kind of tree damage in the Sierra, as Susie Coker suggested, but there can be property losses as well. And so I think thinking about these tools in the context of property as well as in livestock are important. When we talk to ranchers in particular about the types of tools that they're selecting, there are a whole host of factors that go into what make a particular tool the appropriate choice. From a commercial standpoint, and I would suggest that this is also true in a commercial timber operation, you've got to look at the costs and the benefits. What do you have at risk? What is the cost of that risk? And what are the costs of protecting those assets? But then there are also some cultural attitudes and market pressures that come to bear in these considerations as well. There are an awful lot of cattle producers on the North Coast that started out as sheep producers, and they switched to cattle because of predator pressure on small ruminants. And so there's a whole host of kind of perspectives that go along with that. Then I think the other piece of it that's really important is to understand carnivore ecology, understand diet selection and kind of the types of habitats that these animals are living in, how we're intersecting those habitats. I think that's in particular with forest land and with rangeland. As California continues to grow, we have a lot more overlap in these wild landscapes that are also economic landscapes in terms of timber production or livestock production. We'll talk a little bit about some of the indirect impacts that we see in livestock as well, because I think that's something that's underappreciated with many of these predator species too. I talked a little bit about commercial versus non-commercial impacts, and I think one of the things that distinguishes these considerations is that on a commercial standpoint, you have to consider the economics. And to be honest, I think most commercial producers think about some kind of level of acceptable loss. No loss is welcome, but there's a level at which you chalk it up to the environment, I think. I think there are some tools that are better suited to more rural settings, in particular guard dogs. We'll talk a little bit about that and why that is. I think structural tools like night pinning or electric fencing or tree guards for that matter may be more appropriate where you've got neighbors that may object to a dog that barks at a bear all night. So thinking about your own context in terms of your own neighborhood is important as well. In terms of the direct versus the indirect impacts, it's really easy to measure dead livestock at kind of market values. One of the challenges in rangeland settings is that we often don't know livestock are missing until we gather and ship in the fall. And so with the number of predators that are also scavengers in these landscapes, if you don't come upon an animal that's been predated on right away, it's pretty difficult to tell what happened. Also understanding the source of the depredation is really critical. You know, we have decided that our management of mountain lions in particular is going to be different than it is in other parts of the West. We've got limitations on dealing with wolves as well. And so understanding the source of predation is really important. If you're a livestock producer, there is an insurance product offered through USDA that pays for a portion of those losses if you can prove that they're predator losses. But indirect impacts can often be more significant, and this is especially true with wolves, but may also be true with some of the other predators. We do tend to see things like reduced weaning and sale weights, which obviously reduces income, and that's associated with stress from being in proximity to these predators. We also see reduced reproductive success. So we may see lower conception rates, and we may see abortions where there is a great deal of stress induced by predators. Because of stress, we also tend to see some increased disease issues, and associated with that, a reduced response to vaccination, so a reduced immune response because of stress. Obviously, genetic potential is part of that, but I think this labor and other costs applies across the board, whether you've got livestock or other resources. If you're cleaning up after bear damage or fixing fence or looking for livestock that have gotten out of a pasture, that increases your labor costs as well. This is from a publication that collaborated with a number of folks in California on, including Roger, really looking at this from the perspective of livestock production, but I think it also comes into play when we're thinking about other resources. And if you look at those types of tools that have more green spots than not, livestock guardian dogs seem to be effective in just about every situation. Attractant removal from a livestock perspective, we're really talking about carcass removal, and also to some extent feed storage can also be effective. And then having buildings that you can lamb or kid or calve in can be pretty effective. Livestock guardian dogs, I think, to me, from a livestock perspective, are probably the most useful tool out there. Most of the working breeds here in the Western US are not purebreds at all. We do see, we think about the common breeds like Great Pyrenees and Anatolian Shepherds, Akbash to some degree. We've got some new breeds that USDA has brought in and tested, particularly in wolf country, with some pretty good success. But it's really important, just like it is with any working dog, to get genetics from working parents. There are pet livestock guardian dogs that do a great job of guarding the porch, or that roam and don't stay home with livestock. And I think it's really important to understand the genetic component of this as well. They appear to protect livestock without displacing the predators. And Carolyn and I are doing some research in the Sierra foothills here and then up north of Truckee, kind of looking at whether that is true. And it does appear that predators remain present on the landscape. They just decide to do something other than eat livestock. There is some evidence that they can increase grazing efficiency, that grazing animals are less vigilant and perhaps braver when they're with a dog and will go into areas that they might not venture into without a dog. There's been some work in Australia looking at all types of operations from a scale standpoint and from a livestock species standpoint. One of the interesting things that is happening more recently, and this is work that's being done by Julie Young at Utah State University, is figuring out how we can bond animals to a place rather than to livestock. Some of the work that Carolyn and I are doing is really focused on proper bonding techniques with livestock, but there is some potential to bond them with place. And in particular, in this research, they're trying to bond dogs with grain fields in northern Montana, where they've had increased grizzly bear activity as a place to protect farmsteads and grain bins and that sort of thing. I think having an animal that is also at least omnivorous, protecting my livestock is a pretty good deal. But there are some downsides to guard dogs as well. Certainly some liability of having big dogs that can be aggressive towards things that they perceive as a threat. And if you've got neighbors close by, you can expect to hear about your dog barking at night because that's their kind of first line of defense. And so they fit in a lot of ways, but maybe not in every circumstance. From a livestock perspective, there are a lot of folks that use donkeys. I think in forested environments, they're not nearly as effective. They tend to need more sight line kind of detection of predators. If you're keeping livestock that are grazing, they are easier to keep because they don't require extra feed. But I think in this kind of forested environment, they're probably not as effective. Llamas are kind of similar in that regard to donkeys. My theory about llamas is that they were invented by Dr. Seuss, and they look and smell so different to the predators in North America that it takes those predators a while to figure it out. Dan talked a little bit about habituation, and I think that's true of llamas as well. Once predators figure out that llamas are not a threat and they become habituated to them, I think they're far less effective. In terms of carcass removal, one of the things that we're finding with wolves in particular is that all scavengers are attracted to these boneyards, to dead animals. And so where we can remove those boneyards and remove carcasses, it can be a pretty effective tool. Where we're using guard dogs, we also find that guard dogs like to scavenge. And so if they're busy feeding on a carcass, they may be leaving the livestock unprotected. In terms of carcass removal, we do have some legal issues in California. We can't compost mammalian flesh at the moment legally, except in emergency situations. There is some research happening to address that. But I think as we think about carcass or attractant removal, there's other things that we need to think about in these forested environments. Mike talked about beehives a little bit, and I'll get to electric fence here in a moment. But certainly proper garbage storage and food storage and other attractants are part of the thing that we need to think about in terms of coexisting with these predators, and in particular with bears. Woven wire fencing can be a really expensive barrier. Coyotes can get through a 4x6-inch hole or jump over a 4-foot fence. Mountain lions can jump over a much higher fence. I think there's impacts to non-predator wildlife from these types of fences as well. And so they can be kind of around a home or a farmstead, they can be appropriate, but not necessarily predator proof. Permanent electric fencing is mostly a psychological barrier. Typically they may be as many as 12 wires. I've seen a lot of fences that are less intensively built, 4-wire, 3-wire fences. In dry conditions like we experience here in the summertime, they are less effective. They need a good grounding system. And we, particularly in forested environments, we do find branches and trees falling over them, which may ground them out. When we started in the sheep business, we had sheep in Colfax in a forested environment, and did have a black bear come and touch the fence one night and decided he was really pissed off and tore out about 300 feet of electric fence by the time he was through. So I think you have to have the fences running really, really hot to be effective in dealing with black bears. Temporary electric fence is another tool. We see this a lot with beehives. And because it's temporary and mobile, it can be moved around quite a bit. With these smaller electric fences, like you would put around a yard or around beehives, you can get them really hot. It's not inconceivable that they would be running in excess of 10,000 volts through those wires. And that, having touched those fences by mistake, that'll light up your life a little bit. We use in the sheep business, we use a lot of this temporary electronet fencing, which can be really effective against most predators. You can get it as tall as 48 inches. Most people use a 42-inch fence. It does require a higher capacity energizer because every one of those horizontal wires in that netting is energized. But we see people in larger, more extensive systems use this fencing for night pinning, or for specific issues where they've got a lot of predator pressure. I have seen beekeepers use this as well, and it can be pretty effective in that regard as well. Probably not a lot of folks dealing with wolves at the moment in this group, but fladry and turbo fladry in particular, which is an electrified wire with these red flags on it, seems to be pretty effective in deterring wolves. It seems that it's a novel visual stimulus that the wolves do fear. We don't know how effective it is with other predators at the moment. But again, habituation can be a big issue, and maintaining this system is a big issue. It does require regular maintenance and regular checking to be effective. In terms of livestock, night pinning can be really effective, in particular for smaller operations, and for things like chickens and poultry. Where here in Auburn, we do have some bear conflicts with poultry. Night pinning can be pretty effective. I know that our local wildlife services folks have also recommended some electrified mats that can be put on the ground near entrances or weak points in hen houses or other buildings, that can deliver a shock as well. And so that may be something to think about in combination with night pinning. There are a variety of fright tactics and devices out there that seem to have kind of a limited geographic scope that may be effective with some canine predators. I suspect that with some predators, a flashing light at night is kind of like the Eat at Joe's neon sign. It says there's something here, come check it out. But there is some evidence that with foxes and to some degree coyotes, these strobe lights can be pretty effective. I think one of the challenges with these types of devices is that if they are random in nature, predators will habituate to them fairly quickly. If they require some sort of behavioral activation on the part of the predator, motion sensors or something like that, I think they have greater impact. This is just thrown up here because it does get asked about a lot in terms of livestock production. And I think it's interesting to note that the black bears are coming out of hibernation or torpor with a lack of calories available to them, which happens to be when people may be lambing. And so are we setting up potential conflict by our production calendars? And it's not always easy to vary these. There's lots of reasons that people may lamb or calve or kid at certain times of year. And so there's more that goes into that than simply avoiding depredation. I think from my perspective, kind of these combinations of tools are probably the most effective approach, and then adapting. I think as the predators we're trying to deal with habituate, we may need to adapt our tools more frequently. I also think, particularly with these kind of behavioral techniques, tool is a bad word. I think we're much more complicated than taking a tool out of the toolbox to avoid a bear coming on the ranch. We're really trying to understand bear behavior, livestock behavior, guardian dog behavior, and how all those things interact. I think it's also really important to understand paradigms. the first time a guard dog gets out and goes to the neighbor's house, if you're convinced a guard dog is too expensive and too much trouble, that will just prove your case. If you're convinced that guard dogs are an effective tool the first time that happens, you'll try to solve the problem. And so I think that's important to remember in terms of tool adoption. I suspect this is true of forest landowners just as it is with livestock owners. But you really, I think we need to do the kind of peer-to-peer sharing where people are trying tools and talking to their neighbors and colleagues about it. People can hear a cooperative extension guy talk all night long about guard dogs, but until they actually see the dog in action, I think it's hard to make that case. The other thing in terms of research that I think is difficult here is I have yet to find the livestock producer that would want to be the control flock for testing livestock protection tools. Nobody wants to leave their livestock unprotected. And so how do we have this kind of control treatment type of an approach? Carolyn and I are working on figuring out kind of how these tools work, in particular with guard dogs, and looking at interactions in natural landscapes. And I think there's a lot of value to documenting case studies in this regard as well. This is some of the work we're doing up in Truckee. And think it's really interesting to see guard dog with sheep on the same trail that a coyote's using within a couple of days of one another, which to me indicates that the coyotes are there, but just not preying on sheep. We're using some home-built GPS technology, and actually this is something, if you're interested in guard dogs from a practical standpoint, there are some tools out there where you can locate dogs in real time on your phone and figure out if they're where they're supposed to be. So there's some pretty cool technology coming online for that. And then a few other thoughts. I think coexistence in my mind, and this is really a livestock perspective for sure, but that coexistence is kind of a contractual relationship in my mind. I absolutely love having predators in my environment that are not eating sheep. And if they're not eating sheep, my contractual obligation is to not mess with the predators. But we also need to expect that lack of conflict from these predators. And so I think that's one of the challenges that we have in California, is that sometimes those tools may be limited to us. And I'll share this with you folks as well, but here's some further reading if you're interested in all of that. And with that, you can't end a talk on predators without Far Side. I'm sorry. But you always have to have Far Side cartoons to end the talk on wildlife.
Those were great, Dan. Thank you.
Well, let's see if I can quit sharing here.
Does anyone have any questions for Dan?
One question is, when I was in Yellowstone, I purchased some wool products that were considered predator friendly. Is that just incorporating, I imagine, the flagging and things like that, Great Pyrenees and so forth, and it's been effective or greatly effective for those individuals?
Yeah, there are several certification programs out there for predator friendly that I think are starting to have some create some opportunities for people to get some economic incentive to be more predator friendly. I like to say my guard dogs are not predator friendly, so I can be. But yeah, I think they're becoming more certification programs like that.
So there was a question sent to me, Dan, about you mentioned the place-based research that's going on in Utah right now. Are there any preliminary findings or preliminary ways that one could teach the guard dog to be more place-based? Because that could potentially work for forest landowners.
Yeah, and Carolyn, you may have some perspectives on this too. I think, you know, it's kind of the opposite of what we try to do with livestock. We really try not to bond the dogs with us as people. And that early socialization process is really focused on getting the dogs to interact mostly with livestock. They're pretty hard dogs not to love on. They're big white fuzzballs when they're puppies. And so I think getting them to bond with you or with your family is relatively easy to do. I think the challenge is keeping them on site. And one of the challenges that I've noted with big extensive sheep operations is that on occasion dogs will chase predators a fairly long distance. Carolyn, the research that Carolyn and I are doing in Truckee suggests that those dogs are staying more close to the sheep than we had anticipated. But definitely something to watch and see if there's some particular bonding techniques that they're discovering are effective in that Utah State study. Carolyn, anything you'd add to that?
Yeah, I think Julie Young had mentioned that they, in most of those situations, they had a house dog that was in this. So the LGD, livestock guardian dog, wasn't just by itself. It did have some company. So it didn't necessarily like really want to leave the property, which again is different. I guess you're just bonding it to your dog versus livestock. And there are certain breeds of LGDs that are going to be more like adapted to just like homestead protection. I think like Caracachan is one. Dan, I don't know if the top of your head, it's some of the other European breeds that after World War II started to be used more for just property protection. So some of those breeds might be a little bit easier to keep in that sort of situation.
Yeah, and most of these dogs do come from kind of Southern Europe and Central Asia. And I think the Southern European dogs are a little more likely to be bonding with people and bonding with the place.
And just it comes down to barking, how close your neighbors are.
Yep. Yep.
Thank you. Any other questions for Dan or Carolyn or any of the other speakers? We did have one comment for Dan Ruka wanting to know, are we going to be able to have access to the final results of your study when it's completed?
Yeah, probably won't be for another year or two. It's got to actually get the full analysis done and stuff, and it should be a paper that eventually gets published with my findings.
I do want to just respond quickly to the comment that shelters are overflowing with Great Pyrenees. And I think that's another piece of the challenge in this, using these dogs as a tool. That most of the dogs that I'm familiar with that have come out of shelters are either dogs that failed to stay where they're supposed to stay, or that were aggressive towards livestock. And so that bonding process is important, both in terms of getting them to stay where they need to be, but also kind of creating that bond with livestock that that doesn't result in them killing livestock.
Thank you. All right. Well, before we go, we'll be here for a few more minutes. If you have some more questions, feel free to put them in the chat box. I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording real quick. And then for those of us